Good evening or afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you very much for coming to my talk in NDC Sydney, the first NDC Sydney so far. Yeah, obviously. Who I am, my name is Cristian Prieto. You can just reach me on Twitter and things like that. And it's the place when I just vent out, and so just don't get scared if I look like a psychopath or something like that over there, because that's the real life. Just in case you pick this talk because you thought that was the ASP.NET Core or something like that, it's not. This talk is about JavaScript through history, or what history can explain why JavaScript is so goddamn ugly that it looks made by Satan himself. Why? Well, actually, the reason because I started this talk is that months ago, I was having this conversation with a good friend of mine, this guy over here. And he's a Haskell hipster, right? And look, I do understand and all the stuff and things like that. And I said, look, and he was like bashing JavaScript. Oh, it's the JavaScript, yada, 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 because it's the low-hanging fruit. Everybody can bash JavaScript, right? So I said, look, to be honest, I don't see why JavaScript is different than any other language. Like, for example, if you see C++ or C, inclusive C, and you see C through the history, you see that the first version of C, and even like the current, the other revisions were awful. So we need to understand something very important here about JavaScript, or why JavaScript is awful, or why we have to keep the faith that it will change in the future. It is that programming languages are like human languages, right? I'm kind of like rookie linguistics. I love linguistics, especially Proto-Indo-European linguistics. And one of the first things that you understand is that languages are living entities. They are born, they evolve, they just change through time, and we cannot control what happened. Languages evolve. Languages obey to requirements by the people that are like the people using it. Can you close the door, please? The people that is using it, and change based on their need. Good example to see this is looking at Old English. How many of you are native English speakers? A few of you. This is the first fragment, or the oldest fragment of English that we have knowledge of. Is Beowulf, and it's written in Old English. Old English is as well known as Anglo-Saxon, right? How many of you native speakers understand what it says? It's just 500 years old. No, 1,000 years old. And this is actually what it means. When you compare one by one, they are very different because languages evolve. The same with programming languages. We cannot control the evolution. It's not like a Pokemon, right? That you just like make it evolve and change, right? Sometimes the evolution is just screwed up in the same way that you just like, if put the Firestone to an Eve, it just transforms into a Flareon, right? So sometimes you can do that. Or the worst thing, that you just give a Thunderstone to a Pikachu to transform into a Radion. That's the worst thing, that you cannot control what is going to happen. Once it's happened, you go, damn it, right? The same happened in English. This is taken from one of those popular anonymous stuff that say, like, if the singular is this and the plural is this, would the plural keys ever be called keys, right? And I don't know you guys, but I'm not native speaker. Yeah, my accent looks like I'm coming from North Queensland, but it's not. And as a native Spanish speaker, many things doesn't make sense. But English, if you want to be a developer, English is your lingua franca. If you want to be a developer now, JavaScript is the lingua franca. You just mold the language. And as I said, because that usage mold the language, sometimes we cannot see what is coming afterwards, because modern English doesn't make sense, neither JavaScript. So why? why we got here. Well, historically, I want to explain you why JavaScript looks so awful and why it has better stuff. Believe me, it's just, for me, was a revelation. It was like, you know what, I saw, I don't know, it was because I hit my head or something, but I saw lights and things like that that makes me appreciate JavaScript a little more. It's still made by Satan, but, you know, how JavaScript was born? Well, in the beginning, we are talking about 1993. When there was nothing, there was something named NCSA Mosaic. And that was the first kind of commercial browser that we know. There was other before that. There was a browser named Voila. And there was another one named Amadeus. But Mosaic was the first one widespread. It was a simple browser. It did what it has to do, go to the web, right? And part of that story, Mosaic was actually like created by a company, not a company, NCSA. That is the National Center for Supercomputing Application. That is a venture between the federal state of the United States and the University of Illinois. Because of that, it was by the state. They could not sell software because it's a state-owned, right? So instead of that, they created a spin-off named Spyglass Incorporated. Remember that name, Spyglass Incorporated. We will get into that name later. The story of Mosaic is that there was this developer, Andresen. And Andresen, he created the first Mosaic for Unix, named XMosaic, that ran in X3 Windows. The story says that Al Gore just saw that shit and said like, whoa, that thing looks awesome, man. Can we just like do shit with internet and things like that? And it was like, yeah. So the thing is that they start like doing work for internet, and in 1993, Mosaic was out. But the thing is that this guy Anderson, he was like, you know what? I had kind of idea for business, man. That thing about like being poor all my life, that doesn't call my attention. So he left NCSA, and together with one of the founders of Silicon Graphics Interactive or Incorporated, SGI, he just like created their own company. The company was called Netscape, and that was around circa 92. Originally, Netscape was not created to be a company around browsers. They have no interest in browsers at all. But Anderson saw the potential of the internet, and his idea of creating business was creating like network for playing games. Seriously, that was like in 1993. Was the time that Dota and all that stuff, that was since 1993. There's like, hey, what if we just don't connect like Nintendo console? Because he was working for getting a contract from Nintendo to connect Super Nintendo consoles so they can play together in a network. Obviously, Nintendo was like, nah, that's never going to work, man. Right? And the guys was like, well, we just ran out of money. Well, what do we have? Hey, look, the only thing that we have is like the pieces of this stuff, because there were developers as well that he brought from NCSA, and there was like this small things that was a browser, the beginning of a browser, that didn't have code from Mosaic, right? It was completely homemade, right? And they decided to release this as a browser, commercial, and sell it. So they released the first version, Mosaic Netscape. That was the first name. Obviously, the guys from Spyglass and NCSA was like, hey, wait a minute. We have the trademark for Mosaic. So what up? And 9.4 million later, they renamed to Netscape. That was around 1994. So originally, the browser was called Netscape, the same as the company. With every version, they changed the name. So the first version was called Netscape Mosaic, because the concept of web browser was new. They didn't even know what was that type of software. Oh, it's like now that people say like, oh, just click in the internet, right? To start Internet Explorer or something like that. In those days, it was the same. They didn't know what was the name this. So they say like, oh, that type of software is called Mosaic. So Netscape was out. One of the stories regarding Netscape is that when they started Netscape, the idea was to be a mosaic killer, right? So that was the code name for the project, the mosaic killer. So when it was short, the nickname was Mozilla. And that's the origin of the word Mozilla. You just learned something new today, right? It means mosaic killer. There's another story regarding like the user agents and things like that, but you can ask me outside in the cruise or something like that. So end up that Netscape was very popular. People were paying dollars. I think that the original price of Netscape was $10. So people were paying like $10 to this company, this new company, Netscape, to get like an amazing browser. Because there was like, the other option was Mosaic that was really slow and awful. So then, because it's money, somebody's like, what, money? I like money. And they said, you know what? Let's make a browser as well. But I can imagine the people around there like, Bill, you are crazy, right? Do you want to do a browser? Do you know that everybody right now is busy doing this thing called Windows 95? So we don't have developers. We only have 4 guys that we just hire, and that's the only thing that we have. You know what? It's true. We don't have time for making a browser. Let's buy one. So you remember that I mentioned Spyglass? That was the commercial venture of NCSA. Well, that Spyglass company had a browser, Mosaic. So the guys from Microsoft was like, hey, what if we buy your Mosaic render engine and make that our own browser? We will call it Internet Explorer. And they were like, oh, good, man, but you have to pay your royalties as well. So Microsoft was like, damn it, we have to pay royalties for using Mosaic. You know what? To avoid paying royalties, that's another very important word here, royalties. You will mention this, I will mention this so many times. Let's make it free. So if we make it free, I don't have to pay you royalties. And it was like, fair enough. And they released that. So the first version of Internet Explorer, its user agent string was NCSA Mosaic 1 as well. But there was no JavaScript. So far here, it was just the web browser, to just the proto-internet, to call it something like that. So they decided to go with something better. Netscape, that was the leader, and have like so much money. So they're like, you know, man, I want to make this thing like more interactive. So what if we add a scriptive language for this stuff? Remember that Java was popular in those days as well. Originally, I didn't know this, but now I know, and I will share with you. Originally, they actually wanted to embed Java inside Netscape, but it was too complicated. So they just went from Brendan Eich, and Brendan Eich said, Anderson just said, hey, man, you know what? You always complain that you don't have anything to do that is cool. So you have 10 days to do a programming language. And Brendan Eich was a Lisp developer. He used to work in making compilers in Scheme. So he said, like, sweet, I have this nightmare about this language based in Scheme, and I want to make it. And the first version of that language, after it was done in just 10 days, was called Mocha. I don't know if it's related to the Mocha test engine now or something like that, but it was called Mocha. Obviously, that name was not hip enough. It was like, man, with that thing, we are not going to sell anything, right? So one in marketing has this brilliant idea. It's like, because when you use it, you make things live. In the page, let's call it LiveScript. And in fact, the first version, I have a version of Netscape. That's how much I love you guys. I installed Netscape 2 and Netscape 2 Beta in a virtual machine. The first version was called LiveScript, and that was in September. That was renamed to LiveScript, September 95, right? The thing is, again, Java was the hot thing there. Everybody wants to Java everything, right? So again, marketing, amazing marketing just came and said like, dude, what if we call the language JavaScript? Because it's an scripting language that is kind of like Java. It was like, man, it doesn't look like Java at all. No, forget about that. You and your technical stuff. And they were like, okay, dude, but if we just call it JavaScript, we have to pay royalties to Oracle. So they just came to Oracle and said like, no, Oracle nowadays, was Sun in those days. Sun was like, hey, Sun, what if we pay you this bunch of money so we can use the name JavaScript? And Sun was like, okay, I like money. It was so into that, or Java was so important in the name, that when Netscape was released, the press conference in early 96, I think it was in February 96, Sun was in the press conference. And Sun had nothing to do with Netscape. But there was. It's like, just imagine, it's like making a party and inviting Kim Kardashian just because you want to be popular. Right? Was exactly the same. So far, JavaScript is still a registered trademark by Oracle. So just be careful using the word JavaScript, because probably one day Oracle is going to sue you. An important thing that was in the first specification of the ECMA standard, or the JavaScript itself, we will get there soon, is what is the definition of an scripting language. And this is the first thing that you need to understand when you start smashing your head against the wall when you find something in JavaScript that you don't like. JavaScript is a scripting language. It was designed just to extend the browser, originally to create plugins for Netscape, not just the web page, as well to extend Netscape. And as part of the definition, in the official definition of JavaScript, we find this paragraph. Notice the word informalities and built-ins. That means here be dragons. Don't complain that the language is awful, because we warn you, it has informalities. So every time they say like, why true is not equal true? Because it has informalities. I was a little curious about first how much JavaScript evolved through time, or if it was compatible. So I downloaded the first version of Netscape. Not the first version that had JavaScript, Netscape 2.0, with that, and tried to load Google. 47 errors loading Google. I actually never even imagined that Google had JavaScript until I run this. So it doesn't load. Don't try it. Don't try to live in the age of Netscape 2, because it's not going to work. There was another version of JavaScript as well developed by Sun, by Netscape. Not only the JavaScript for the browser. Netscape as well has a web server. And for that web server, they create something named Livewire. That was JavaScript for the server. So you can just connect to database and things like that. So the next time a hipster comes to you and says that Node.js was the first one to bring JavaScript to the server, just kick him in the balls. Netscape Livewire was the first. Netscape Livewire depends of proprietary extensions like database and things like that, and it has a server tag as well. So a lot of proprietary extension. Guess what happened? JavaScript was goddamn popular, and everybody just like went nuts and started using JavaScript for everything. It was like yesterday, right? That jQuery was out, and everything just created a plugin in jQuery to sum two numbers. So the same thing happens here. They went crazy, and like they start getting the market share. Internet Explorer, remember that Internet Explorer 1 was out already. And Internet Explorer 1 only had in those days a market share of like probably 3 people, right? That were from Microsoft, and they have to test Internet Explorer. So that's the reason, because they were using it. And everybody else was using Netscape. So what happened is that Microsoft came and said like, oh, scripting, I can do that as well. And they released Internet Explorer 2 with VBScript. How many of you write web pages in VBScript? It was not popular at all. Microsoft was like, you know what? These guys just I leverage Java, like using Java to just attract people. I'm going to use Visual Basic to attract people. Didn't work very well. There is a mistake in the Google page for Internet Explorer. And the Google page in Internet Explorer says that Internet Explorer 2 was shipped with JavaScript. That it cannot be possible because JavaScript was released with Netscape in 96, and Internet Explorer 2 was released in October 95. So it was not possible. There was not even like a living example of JavaScript itself. And it said, yeah, it was with JavaScript, and it's not true. What they was released was with VBScript. Then Netscape 3 was out. We are talking about here, it was in August 96. Netscape 3.0 was out with JavaScript 1.1. The biggest change here was that you now in JavaScript can change the location of images, because images in the original JavaScript specification was not possible to, it was not part of the DOM model. It was until JavaScript 1.1 that the images was part of the DOM model. So when you they add the ability to, from JavaScript, change the location of images. So in that way, you have hovers and effects and things like that. You remember those like GeoCities pages that went like crazy and things? It was because 1.1. Again, one of the things that you learn is that when you release a new features, people got nuts and start like using it for everything. It's like, oh my God, can you just change images? Oh my God, I'm going to make such a great website now. And Microsoft said like, hey, I want to do that as well. The other problem that it has after that is that there was no more version of JavaScript. So originally, to specify which version of JavaScript you are going to execute, you have to add this. 1.2 for 1.2, 1.1 for 1.1, and so on. That was the version in those days. Thanks God it was changed. Because right now we will be in something like JavaScript 5.0.000.1, something like that, right? As again, it was popular. Netscape was owner of the market. They have JavaScript. VBScript never worked. So Microsoft decided to release Internet Explorer 3. And with Internet Explorer 3, they released JavaScript as well. They just basically copy the implementation of JavaScript from Netscape. But there was a problem. The name JavaScript. It means that I will have to pay some for that. Dude, it's a free browser. I just given this for free, and I already pay Spyglass a lot of money. I'm not going to pay to some for this. And it was like, chill out, man. I have the solution. Let's call it JScript. Interesting, most people think that JScript is another dialect of JavaScript. Now it is, but originally it was not. It was a verbatim copy of the specification of JavaScript at the beginning. The only reason that it has a different name was because trademark. So that's another thing. JScript in JavaScript was originally the same. It was just money. And then something happened. Internet Explorer was everywhere. Because Internet Explorer 3 became a really, really good browser. It's hard to believe, right? Because now everybody's matching Internet Explorer. But just imagine how crazy was the people in the mid-90s. That Internet Explorer 3 was an amazing browser, and everybody was like, oh my God, I thought you are using Netscape? You are nothing, man. You have to download this sweet, sweet, sweet browser named Internet Explorer. I see Aaron over there like laughing because that is his dream. So Internet Explorer was everywhere and became famous. And another thing that was even more important suddenly happened. A new web was born. Originally, you have very static things and very ugly as well. And the new things that happened is that the W3C was born and create the CSS specification, right? So you have now a document that can specify how something looks like. So designers went crazy again. First was, whoa, whoa, whoa. First, you let me change the location of images, and now you allow me to put colors and shit like that? Ha! Everybody was like crazy, right? But the problem was that it was more complex now, because now you have to reference elements in the web page, elements that were not there. With great power comes great responsibility. Now, how JavaScript is going to do that? Because JavaScript was very tied, still very tied to the DOM model. So Netscape came in Netscape 4 with a new idea, layers. And that was out in JavaScript 1.2, Netscape 4, and a new breed of HTML was created. It was called DHTML, or Dynamic HTML. In fact, I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember that the first applications were called scriptlets or HTMLets. That thing about like React and things like that, next time you just pull out your scriptlet. So layers was a way to reference elements in the web page, right? So the problem was that it depended a lot of things like with tags, proprietary tags. That was the layer tag. And another problem is that it was not backward compatible with other browsers. If you are already using layers, you are screwed. Everybody has to use Netscape 4, or you are nothing. The other problem that is that the layer model was awful, was really awful. Because basically it was based in the idea that you have a DOM level 0, that is document, and then you have document.paragraph.something else. So it was obviously created by a developer, right? It was like, yeah, it makes sense. It's like hierarchy, you know? But it didn't work out. It was too complex to code, especially very complex like pages. And you have to put everything that you need to move or change into the layers tags. So if it was no wrap under the layer tag, you cannot use anything. So nobody was using layers. And the poor bastards that were using layers, they were just like using tricks like detecting if it was Netscape 4, then serve the page with layers. Is not just take this whole page to serve. Pretty much what we do with Internet Explorer nowadays. Layer was out and everything was OK. And Netscape decided to make JavaScript ECMA compliant, so making it a standard. So they pushed JavaScript in '97 to the ECMA standard and create ECMAScript 1.0. Originally, it was made by Netscape, just by Netscape. You will find as well in books and things like that ECMAScript 1.0 is exactly the same as ECMAScript 2.0. And that is truth. 1 and 2 are exactly the same. What happened is that then they want to create that ECMAScript an ISO standard, so they have to change the way that they reference the things, because it's like writing papers. Every journal has a different way to receive papers, so they have to change everything, but the language continues the same, so that was ECMAScript 2.0. JavaScript, it was kind of the sort of same as 3, and kind of the same as JavaScript 1.3. This is important. I say kind of the same, because they were not the same. The story said that they went push the standard, they are still working in 1.3, so they never published things like, for example, not a number or the exact equality operator. So those exact equality operator, together with switch, while, export, and import, and the object of regular expression were not present in that specification. Just DOM 0 as well. That is just document or what is referenced in the first level of the DOM. And then something happened that we cannot believe. Internet Explorer 4 was out. It came with Windows 98, second edition. That was a very popular Windows. So far, I think that is one of the best Windows, because it has DirectX, and all my games were running pretty there. And one of the best things that the Internet Explorer 4 had is that instead of using the layer model, they said, like, this shit is too complex. Let's use a better way. And they started using the get element by ID, get element by class, instead of using the layer references. And that was amazing, because instead of learning all this lot of hierarchies and things like that, I just have two methods that are available in my window object and do everything. You can say thanks to Internet Explorer for that. So everybody was in love with this. Again, I see you laughing, man, but it's because, yeah, it's the first time that somebody actually stand and defend Internet Explorer somehow. And then what happened before that is that the W3C specification liked the get element by ID as well, and say, like, you know what? Let's ditch the layer system, and let's use this for the next specification. So one of the things that happened is that we are mentioned right now JavaScript 1, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and then we will skip on to 1.5. So what happened with JavaScript 1.4? There was a 1.4 version, but was available only in the Livewire server, in the Netscape web server. So yeah, you can just impress, like the next party that you go, you just can impress a lady saying, like, you know about JavaScript 1.4? That's the way I got my girlfriend, by the way. And then they pushed ECMAScript 3.0. ECMAScript 3.0 was JavaScript 1.5 that had just a few elements, and with the get element by ID, get element by class. So they ditched the layer. They put what Internet Explorer brought to the table that was in JScript. It was not as part of the JavaScript specification. And they got JavaScript 1.5 that just include things like, for example, the exact equality operators, and not a number undefined appeared for first time in JavaScript 1.5. So, and that happened. JavaScript 3.0 or ECMAScript 3.0. So far we know that ECMAScript 1.0 is JavaScript 1.3. ECMAScript 2.0 is 1.3 as well. That is the same as 1.0. And ECMAScript 3.0 is JavaScript 1.5, right? I told you, this thing is like a pack of rats. And everybody was happy. You know, Internet Explorer was gaining market. Netscape disappeared. The story of why Netscape disappeared is that they tried to push very hard. What I mean that is that they didn't give a damn about people that already have like old versions of Netscape. And every new version, with every change that they're trying to do, will break previous browsers. It's something that Microsoft learned very well, and that's the reason because they have to create Edge, because, you know, we just screwed up so many times, right? Netscape tried to do something like that. And around Netscape 5.0, they stopped charging for Netscape and just giving for free. I don't know, because the idea is just was selling the server. After that, it didn't like run very well. And what they did is that they decided, you know what, people is going crazy for open source. Let's open source this stuff. And Netscape 6.0 was the first one using open source. Didn't roll out very well neither, because the open source developers, they are like a really difficult breed to keep happy. And they say, like, you know what, this code is shit. So they just throw away all the code and develop a new engine from scratch. And that was the Gecko engine, instead of using the Mozilla engine that they already had. So that's the story of how one thing just was born from the other. Many people said, like, oh, you know what? Mozilla is the successor of Netscape. Well, Mozilla was the code name for Netscape browser. But the Mozilla project and the Mozilla Foundation was born because they didn't like the code that they saw from Netscape and decided to start everything from scratch. What happened now is that when you have something good, everybody wants a piece of this, right? And in this case, it was many companies. Suddenly, there was no Google in those days. So suddenly, everybody just want to deal with the specification. And a new crusade happened. There was a big fight for how the new JavaScript should look like, working in the equivalent that would be JavaScript 1.6 or ECMAScript 4. There were two companies here. The first was Yahoo and Microsoft. There was a time when Yahoo was big, right? And Yahoo and Microsoft, they were advocating for not doing big changes and do the same that they were doing so far, just releasing small changes. For example, there were like a lot of reserved words in JavaScript that they were not used. So they were like, you know what? Let's just implement the support for those keywords. And they just continue releasing JavaScript 3.1 and so on. But the other group of people, that was the Mozilla Foundation, that is, as I said, from the guys from Netscape and Adobe, that as well start using JavaScript for their engine to create their own language named ActionScript 1 and 2. They decide to push the language forward and create a new format done completely from scratch that was more similar to Java than actually JavaScript. And it was ECMAScript 4.0. And it was crazy. It was not compatible at all with previous version of JavaScript. A good example is ECMAScript 4 at type resolution and things like that, or it was a strong type language. So the problem is that we already have a language that is completely dynamic, and now you are making it like strong type. That thing is not going to roll out because all the pages are not compatible. How do we version this? Because the problem is versioning. You have to create two scripts, one for older browsers and one for new browsers. Microsoft said, like, not even us can cope with that thing. We have just a small team of 300,000 developers, so we cannot cope up with that stuff. And ECMAScript 4 never happened. It just basically, it was like a novel, like a soap opera, when they just like break the heart and it's like, oh, I don't want to see you anymore, and they run away. So there was no ECMAScript 4. Project was abandoned and things like that. And then Microsoft was in those days already like owner of the market and started doing crazy stuff with JavaScript. That was the time when actually there were two different versions and implementations. What happened later is that they decided to, you know, as I said, get together as friends, you know what, let's have a beer or whiskey or whatever you prefer, and let's resolve our differences. Those guys from Adobe, they are like crazy. Don't even invite them. They are like happy with the ActionScript 3.0. Look, the last time they were talking bad things about you, so that's the reason, because I didn't want to tell you or anything. Let's you know. And it was love again. They just like start, both companies, all those companies running, holding hands around like a field with rainbows and things like that. So much that that conference in Oslo was called Harmony. And that's the reason. And then the new standard, ECMAScript 5, was born. It was, look, instead of going like with those crazy guys from Adobe, let's take what Microsoft did in JavaScript 3.1 and let's make that ECMAScript 5. Man, brilliant. You are so brilliant, right? And it happened. It was good. At the beginning, obviously, they didn't have a name for that version. So they called that version, that ECMAScript 5, with many names. Not bad names, actually. One of those names is Harmony. The next time that you pass Harmony to your Node.js application to run ECMAScript 5, it's because that. It's because the Harmony. You are telling, run Harmony JavaScript. Run 5.0. That's the origin of that. But that meeting was called Harmony. Harmony introduced something new as well. And the problem was that you don't want to break compatibility. That was the biggest part. We don't want to break what we already have. We want all pages to work. But we have to fix the language because seriously, it's screwed up. Look, the thing that equals are not the same, and then you can have bars or no bars, and they are exactly the same. That thing is nuts, right? I don't know who designed that. Somebody was Hitler. Hitler designed that. So what they did is that they introduced something named useStrict. And a useStrict is just a string, right? That all the browsers that didn't support ECMAScript 5 will ignore and will continue executing everything as nothing happened. In my opinion, it was actually a good idea. Some people says over there that it was a bad idea and things like that. But I like the idea because you have JavaScript code that will execute all code. And things like, for example, in all code, errors, parsing errors, were errors, right? And some of them before useStrict were just considered warnings. It's like, what is a warning? My code is not running and you're telling me that it's because of warning, right? Do you know priorities, JavaScript, right? So with useStrict, what is happening is that those errors are transformed into exceptions. By the way, try catch was introduced in JavaScript 1.5. If somebody wants to know, right? That try catch. And the reason because try catch was introduced in JavaScript 1.5 is because JavaScript 1.5 was the first one to throw exceptions. Before that, it was just errors. The useStrict was the solution as well to introduce new keywords. Because the problem with when you introduce new keywords is that somebody could use that as a variable name. Good of those keywords is, for example, let. Let was not present in the original JavaScript specification. So it will break things. With useStrict, let is transformed into a JavaScript keyword, a reserved keyword. Without that, it's just a variable. Just in case somebody has that thing, right? How is the future coming? I like this quote, tomorrow was yesterday. It makes you sound like you know what you're telling, right? You're saying. Well, the future is very different now for JavaScript itself, because one of the things that was decided is don't patch the original specification. If you want to create a new JavaScript or things like that, let's use something named Transpilers. And that was actually part of the ideas. There were things that they already resolved in that Oslo stuff, in that Harmony meeting, that they wanted to expand the language, but keeping backward compatibility. So in that way, they will just create a new language that could be transformed into the old language using Transpiler. Like, for example, Babel is the classic. So JavaScript 6.0 was released. Another big change with JavaScript 6.0 was released is that now it's renamed to ECMAScript or ES with the number, because they will have annual releases instead of every 20 years or something like that. Another change is that officially you should not call it JavaScript in any place of the spec because it's ECMAScript. And the reason is that Oracle is holding the patent for the name, the trademark. I was surprised as well reading that. It was like, yeah, you know what, it's ECMAScript or things like that, because the trademark held by Oracle can cause harm for JavaScript engine implementers. The way that ECMA is done now, ECMA 262, that is JavaScript, is very similar to the way that C# is done. It's in a GitHub project, and you just can post there your suggestions to change the language. And those suggestions became drafts that are revised for people. Together with your suggestions, one of the things that you do in that web page is that because you use something named Babel or Babel, I seriously don't know how it's pronounced. I found someone that said that it should be Babel because Australian accent. The guy that made Babel is Australian, but I never heard any Australian say Babel, but Babel. Anyway, that thing, Babel, let's call it. And in Babel, it's just basically a transpiler. You can just plug your own implementation. You can do it. It's actually really easy. How many of you have tried to make your own Babel extension to just add a new keyword into JavaScript? No? Do it. It's a lot of fun. And it's not that complex, actually. So if you have a brilliant idea about to add to JavaScript, like, for example, oh, you know what? I want JavaScript to just, every time that I put unicorn, says, make America great again, right? So what you can do there in that case is go to Babel, create your extension that you will do the transpiling from that unicorns to make America great again, and then just publish there, create a draft, probably call that draft, make America great again, Trump 2016. And then what is going to happen is that they will just like check that draft and try to transform that draft in the next JavaScript spec. If you check the specification, there are like 4 levels or like steps. Not steps, phases. Stages, yeah. Yeah, I'd say I'm not from North Queensland, so. So what happened is that they move forward, and things that are at stage 4 are the ones that are approved for the next release. You can just go in that page, is all the stages and how the process is done. And that is the idea, that you will transpile and you are not going to touch that. Eventually, developers will support the whole gamut of JavaScript extensions or JavaScript in their engines, but it's at their pace. You don't have to change anything, or you trust that it will be executed as you want. There is hope. I know that there is a talk after in the next slide that is there is still dragons in JavaScript ES6 and things like that. But look, it's easier to sell bad news than actually sell good news. Seriously, just have you turned on the TV lately? So it's exactly the same here. There is hope. I hope that we are closer to a JavaScript that looks more natural, and that eventually all those scars that we have from past battles will disappear, because I just don't like it. That is all. Thanks a lot. I tried to make JavaScript history a little more nicer. There's like many stories and anecdotes around here that you can just ask me if you see me outside, or any question, something like that, you are welcome. Remember that JavaScript has more than 20 years. So the next time that you just want to say, why JavaScript cannot be like pure script that is just like 1 year old, is because that is 20 years old, right?
Right, cool.
Melia?
What's happening with evolving spec rumors or things happening with ECMAScript?
No, look, I think that we learned very well about what happened before Oslo, and the fact that we want to diversify and create like a full-blown language with so many things that just resemble another language. I think that is not going to happen. We learned already from their mistakes. I think that there will be rumors that like next JavaScript will be like this or that, or we just like want to fork and things. Fork has happened. That was what happened with ECMAScript 4.
I thought you said stage 4 was what are already approved, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah,
when you get into stage 4, it's the next spec. When it's closed, whatever it is, those is part of the standard.
So object observer thing got to stage 4 and didn't make it something?
But probably was before the standard. Object 3.
Object observer.
Object observer got to stage 2. And then it got killed.
Yeah. I think that was one of the things that happened, right? Because I usually do that in Babel and see the stages. He has used Babel or things like that. You know that you can put presets, and those presets say like, oh, give me all the stage 2 or give me all the stage 4. So yeah, it's not that it doesn't. In the moment that it's caught, that is in June, I think, is whatever is in stage 4 is in the language. There are like a few good ones. A good example of that is decorators. Decorators is a stage 2 as well. So I don't think that even they are going to, they have like what they call a stage 2 and ready for champion. That is like the champion or the person that is proposing that can push that to the next stage. Decorators is ready for champions, so I expect that one day we'll make it. Other thing is like, for example, the auto properties or the self properties that you just like have a property and you define the function immediately. That is a stage 0. That is not even a stage 1. So I will expect that those things will appear until, who knows, ECMAScript 2018 or something like that. But yeah, I think that if something is good, we learn from history, so we don't do the same mistakes, right? The only people that don't learn that is just in politics. But I think that is the important thing, that we are learning. The good things that happen is that evolution of the language little by little without changing things that are happening. JavaScript is awful. It's an awful language. Look, I love programming languages, and JavaScript is an awful language, but we have to live with it. At least that you are like, I don't know, an academic working at an university to create the next generation of Haskell, or my friend over here, you have to live with JavaScript. There's no other option. The same thing as English. I hate English. I remember when I was a kid, I'd say I will never learn English. I went to university, and in university I have the chance to learn a foreign language, and I choose Japanese. And here I am, 20 years later, speaking Japanese. So it's lingua franca. We don't have any other option. So just maybe through history we'll just see that it was worse in the past and have improved. So I don't know. Thank you very much, guys.